Public Q&A presents AskReddit question. Serious people who did a long time, 5 years plus, in prison, what was your biggest shock of the outside world? You forget about the details of things. Like the way carpet feels on the bottoms of your feet. What it feels like to shower completely alone, and without flip-flops on. In prison you have a certain number of smells that you're exposed to every day. Think of them as the first page in a book. But when you get out you have the rest of the book available. It's a lot to take in all at once. With social media and everything, there's the acknowledgement of the passage of time. When I got locked up I left a lot of friends and family behind and did 3 years on my own, no visitors, no calls, no mail. When I got out it was a trip to get on Facebook and Instagram, and see how everyone I was ever close to had moved on with their lives, having kids, getting married, getting fat, losing weight, starting and quitting jobs, falling out with each other, some even passing away. People think about a prisoner doing time, but don't understand that the time does them. You are frozen in it. While you're stuck in a constant loop of the same day every day, the rest of the world moves on without you. When you get home, you feel left behind. It's an anxious panic to catch up after that. Without flip-flops on, man, this one killed me. It felt so weird to stand barefoot in a shower. It took weeks before I was able to tell my brain that this was okay, and that it wasn't disgusting, and I wasn't standing in a puddle of someone else's diseased babies. People think about a prisoner doing time, but don't understand that the time does them. You are frozen in it. While you're stuck in a constant loop of the same day every day, the rest of the world moves on without you. When you get home, you feel left behind. It's an anxious panic to catch up after that. This is an amazing way of putting it. Saddest thing I have read today. I hope things get better for you. I did 6 years. My biggest shock was finding out you can't do much of anything without a smartphone. Companies don't even do paper applications anymore. They don't have TV in there that lets you keep culturally abreast to some extent. Oh, of course. We got basic cable, and I was aware of the new technology, but I had no idea everyone was that dependent on it. My brother served a little over 3 years, but the morning we picked him up we stopped by a grocery store to let him grab some snacks. He's walking back to the car with this stunned look on his face, and finally, as he gets to us he goes, "I felt like I was on an acid trip. I haven't seen that many colors in so long. I need to sit down." Just money in general. You have no idea how to handle money. That takes a little time to get used to. For my cousin, it was the Game Boy Advance. This was a while ago, 2006 or so. My cousin, who'd been in prison for about 10 to 15 years, was finally getting out, so me and a bunch of the family went to pick him up, then go get breakfast at some diner. I was just a little kid at the time, so I was playing with my Game Boy Advance while we were at the restaurant. I'll never forget how much the game I was playing blew my cousin's mind. He saw it and immediately said, "Holy shit, what is that? Look at those graphics. Oh my god, that's insane." His sister, "Are you seeing this shit?" To me, it was just some mess Star Wars game, but to my cousin, it was the future. It's actually through video games that me and him bonded a lot. I would tell him about or show him new stuff in the gaming industry, and he would tell me stories about the games he would play growing up. Game Boy Advance wasn't really even the pinnacle of graphics at that time too. Haha, I know. I remember telling him, "This isn't even that great. Just wait until you see the other games I have at home." And he basically told me that he didn't see how games could look better. LMAO, did you show him? What was his reaction? Edit, what game did you show him? The first game we played when we got home was NFL Street 2 and Burnout Revenge, so nothing that impressive. I also remember telling him about the PS3 like it was some fabled console that would beat the pinnacle of video game graphics. Maybe it's just my nostalgia glasses, but the Burnout series had pretty decent graphics. I have done 5+ years in prison. I was mostly amazed by smart TVs, with Netflix and browsers directly in the TV. And the 4G internet speeds blew my mind as well. My father was incarcerated from 2003 to 2016, and the biggest shock for him was technology, and how much McDonald's has raised prices. LMAO man, I'm kind of at the fuck McDonald's point. I have lived on that shit for most of my life, and I will always have a soft spot for a 1 a.m. double, but it's pricey enough at this point that much better tasting options are available for the same cost. A meal at McDonald's costs almost as much as a meal at Five Guys. Lunch at McDonald's costs like $11 to $14 here. Burger King is like $8. And the drive-through lines are always insane. I'll eat garbage, don't worry about it. I won't pay $14 to eat garbage, and I certainly am not going to pay $14 and sit in my car for 30 minutes for garbage. My father was a counselor in a state prison for 12+ years. He told me the inmates would often talk about wanting to feel their body submerged in water. Taking a bath, swim, etc. There are only showers, so that feeling up being weightless, floating, submerged was something these men would fantasize about. This is so sad and something I've never considered about incarceration. There's something so innocent and innately human about the desire to jump in a river on a hot day, or to take a warm bath in the middle of winter. I also wonder if an increased desire to feel their body submerged is because it's sort of a freeing sensation, which is opposite to the reality of their lives in prison. I would say you're right. It does feel freeing, and you're able to put yourself in a different place. It's haunting to me to think someone could go years, or in some circumstances, the rest of their life, and never feel this sensation again. I know a guy who did 2 to 3 years, I think, and I worked construction with him. I asked him, what is the biggest thing that stands out to you now that you're free? He simply said, the fact that I'm here with you, but I can physically walk over there to that field 500 meters away without anybody or any walls stopping me. Just got out. Weirdest thing was seeing all these damn scooters laying everywhere. That's weird to all of us, man. They just sort of turned up fucking everywhere. Like in the space of a week I'd seen maybe 3 electric scooters that year, and then they were littering the streets. And now they're mostly gone. It's fucking weird. They are still everywhere in Nashville. Saw a group of people riding by, at least 10 of them. At night it's like a scooter graveyard, dead scooters everywhere you look, a little creepy. I work in jail, but when talking to a lifer who was about to go out on parole, I tried explaining smartphones, which blew his mind. Then I described Pokemon Go, and he thought I was just messing with him. He got angry that I would make shit up. I wonder if he's running around playing Pokemon Go now. Imagine explaining that summer where everyone was playing Pokemon Go, and getting into trouble over it. Right. One clever inmate got a friend of his to photocopy his whole Magic the Gathering collection, and sent it in via letters, so he was able to play while inside without costing an arm and a leg. I did 4 years. The day I got out, my uncle took me to Walmart to get everything I needed. I went off by myself to get the things on my list. First, I went to the lotion aisle. I was looking at all the lotion and became so overwhelmed by all the choices: dry skin, healing, scented, etc. In there I had no choices and was given what I needed. Having all these options overwhelmed me. I gave my list to my uncle to get it for me. It was really hard to go out in public for a while. The first night I tried sleeping in a dark bedroom like I did before prison, but couldn't do it. My dad slept on the living room couch with a TV on, so I slept on the other couch. I needed to sleep around people and noise for a while until I got used to being alone again. I was surprised because one of the things I missed the most was sleeping in a dark, quiet room, alone in a comfortable bed. For a long time, I slept with my arm or a pillow over my head because of noise and bugs. Spent 6 years behind bars. When I got out, the biggest shock was the beautiful sights and colors. I forgot how gorgeous nature was. It put the thought into my mind that I never want to go back, because there is no beauty in prison, the beauty is on the outside. I'm glad I'm out now, and every day still take in the amazing outside world for what it is. Edit, I also am having fun with new technology. LOL. When I got to ride in a car again, it felt like we were going about warp 15. I think we're only moving about 45 miles an hour. It tickled my dinky like a roller coaster for about 10 seconds. Also, at the grocery store it was really hard seeing people willfully buying cans of tuna. But I think the hardest thing for me was to quit crushing up spicy Cheetos and putting them in all my food. I remember asking a coworker of mine. He said first was that no one had taken his car. It sat for 6 years unmoved in the street. Tires held air and battery was dead but started with a push. Second was how quickly things had gone up in cost. Rent, food, gas, things like that. For some reason I feel bad for that poor little brave car that sat there for 6 years. I interned at a private criminal defense firm. The most notable shock of any of our released clients had to be one man who in prison for 16 years, odd amount, because he was paroled as part of plea deal. He had a daughter who was just a child at the time he was incarcerated, and when he got out, she had just had a baby, his first grandchild. She didn't tell him about the pregnancy beforehand. She wanted it to be a surprise upon his release. I wasn't there when our old client met his newest family member or his now adult daughter, but when he came in a few months later, he still couldn't talk about the new baby without crying happy tears. He had a picture in his wallet of his daughter when she was little he brought with him to prison, and showed us the new picture of his grandchild he keeps with it now. Second chance to be a pop. Wholesome, very sweet, but bittersweet too. His daughter basically didn't have a dad growing up. I'm not trying to say the guy was a bad dude. For all I know he could have just smoked some weed and ended up on the wrong side of shitty drug laws. I just feel bad for the daughter who missed growing up with a dad who clearly loved her. 5 years for aggravated assault and robbery. I was 3 months past my 18th birthday when I was sentenced. I lived in a small railroad town in south central PA. I guess one of the biggest shocks for me was how much the town had changed. The scrubland where we rode our bikes and dirt bikes is now a strip mall. My friend's driveway is now the main road through that part of town. Someone fixed up the old dive bar and turned it into a fairly popular restaurant and bar. Hell, whole developments popped up all over the place. And while I wouldn't exactly call the changes gentrification, the town certainly has improved as far as standards of living, without ridiculously increasing the cost of living. Shock number 2 was internet access. AOL, NetZero, Earthlink, etc. were the go-to-OS then, but phased out within a couple years of my release as faster access from cable companies became more widely available and affordable. Great question, Op. I don't often get to chime in on this sub. Edit, I'm blown away by the response to this comment. Thank you for the upvotes, comments, questions, concern, and support. And thank you, kind strangers, for the awards. Shock number 2 was internet access. I have a friend who works as a corrections officer. He works a county jail, so he sees people who are awaiting trial, serving short sentences, or awaiting transfer to long-term stays in prison. So he tends to see people at the start of their service to the state. One of the bigger shocks he sees affecting these new inmates is how they've suddenly been cut off from the internet. No social media, no YouTube, nothing, and this outage will go on for years. Yes, there are black market ways to get access, but the initial shock can be pretty severe. Most of us don't realize how addicted we really are to our access. I feel like my technology life has impacted my ability to read a book. It's like I have ADHD now regarding just sitting there and trying to read. Not enough stimulation or something, so I inevitably put it down and go back to my phone, tablet, or laptop. I hate it. I grew up without a TV and have always been a huge reader, and although I am surrounded by books, I haven't finished one in a few years. God damn, I feel the exact same way. I used to read 12 books a year for pleasure and 36 more for classes, and now it's books for classes and skimming at that. Super interesting post, dude. Do you still live in your little hometown, or have you moved on? Thank you. I live in the same area, but a couple towns over. I miss Central Pa. I live near dozens of lakes now in MN, but Raytown Lake will always be dear to me. I did 5.5 on a 6-year sentence. I think my initial shock was how the physical landscape had changed. Places that were once vast swathes of field were now car dealerships and homes. The other one was how people treated and spoke to one another out here. I wanted to fight everyone for about 6 months. I occasionally work with people who've just gotten out of jail or prison, and if it's a longer stay, a weird thing I've noticed is how often they are enamored of things like Spotify. Like once a guy had just gotten out after 10 years, and the first thing he wanted to do was get Spotify set up. He tried to connect through Facebook, but couldn't remember his password. In all though, people getting out of jail are doing so much work to catch up. It's really distressing how little societal support there is if you don't have family to take you in. Was going to say, I have 2 family members who did a very decent amount of time, and of all the things that could have blown their mind, Spotify was the biggest. Even the obscure house artists they were buddies with back in '89 were on there. Not having to burn any CDs or buy records. They still can't get over it. I mean, it really makes sense, like Spotify seems like a fucking fever dream. Every single artist ever in one place for free legally, like there were companies in the 90s and 2000s that got destroyed for this kind of thing, right? I spent roughly 9 years in total at a maximum security prison for some dumb decisions I made as a juvenile. Self-checkout stands at stores and wireless headphones were definitely one of those "this can't be real" moments. I questioned reality. Like when you cannot explain an instance and it scares you trying to cope with, did that really happen? That's how it felt. I was in for robbery too, mandatory minimum of 5 years, 10 months. One of the hardest things for me once I got out was making choices. Let me explain. In prison, you might have 2 choices for shampoo if you're lucky. The first time I went shopping for hygiene essentials was at Target. I remember being so overwhelmed by the amount of choices for shampoo, and having no idea which one to get. I stood in that aisle and cried for a few minutes before I just left without getting anything. Edit. Wow. I did not expect so many responses. I am trying to respond to all the comments, but I have to go to work right now. I will be responding later. Thank you for all of your thoughts. Edit 2. Thank you, kind strangers, for the awards. They are the first I've ever received. My older bro was in for 4, and he had the same struggle as you. Any choice he had to make for himself had him overwhelmed, and understandably so. When asked what boxers he wanted, he just stood there in the aisle staring at them until one of us perked up to help him, and it amazed me in all honesty. Honestly, I still have a hard time with the overwhelming amount of choices for things like that. I have to have a decider with me when I go to get clothing. When I was 15, my parents sent me to live in a cult disguised as a residential care facility for troubled teens. It was worse than prison. Every tiny aspect of life was controlled. A year later, they asked my mom to take me out. Basically, they quietly kicked me out, and she sent me to an actual therapeutic residential school, with counseling and other resources. I, too, was overwhelmed by having to make even small choices. The other kids asked me what kind of music I liked. I didn't know. What to wear / what's my style? I don't know. Choose a side dish to have at dinner. Can't. It was surreal. I felt crazy. My counselor at the time said it's a symptom of PTSD. I hope you're doing better now. I am. That was 20 years ago for me. I hardly ever talk about it now. No reason to bring it up. I know this isn't the same as being in prison or residential care, but I grew up with very strict, controlling, religious parents, and I've struggles with making simple decisions for my entire adult life. For some reason, I never connected the two experiences, but reading these posts, it makes sense. There was this older guy who used to drive a forklift for me. He had done 10 years for manslaughter. I never got the full details because he was a good guy and a great worker, so I didn't care. He went in his early 20s and came out in his 30s, so by the time I knew him, his prison days were already 20 years in the past. So apparently, he went in and his eyesight was bidding all his life, but he was too poor to go see someone about it. His eyes were never checked, and so basically by the time he got out, his eyes were completely shot, and he couldn't see well at all. The halfway house he was in paid for him to see an eye doctor, and he got new glasses that fixed his vision. He recalled to me that it was such an amazing thing to see leaves on trees. He said the world was all pretty much splotches, and to see detail like that blew his mind. This didn't personally happen to me, but I worked for a criminal justice reform group in Florida for about a year and a half. We connected with a guy who got released from prison after 50 years. He was arrested during one of the milk riots in 1968 and locked away for half a century by an infamously racist and vindictive judge. As you can imagine, after so much time he was struggling with a lot, but the big things were that he didn't have any ID anymore and had no way to get it. Didn't know where his birth certificate or anything was. He said, "It's like I don't even exist anymore." That is so sad. I'm not from the US, so forgive my ignorance, but how can someone not have an ID or birth certificate? I honestly don't remember all the details. My guess is his family lost track of the documents over those 50 years. Parents possibly passed away in that time, if they hadn't already, and documents probably got passed along or lost. Writing this for a friend as he doesn't have his own Reddit account, so please understand this is not my story. Friend served 11 years in prison for armed robbery, and not having a permit for a weapon. He wasn't sentenced with this, but admitted to me he had assaulted one of the officers first on scene. I went with his brother to pick him up from prison, and slowly we took it back to where he used to live, 2 hours away. He was always nervous and anxious. His words were, "My biggest shock probably was how much had changed. Mom and Dad live on the other side of the country. I've lost all communication with all my friends but you and a generic other friend name. In a month or so I came by to ask him how he was doing. It's so weird to not have to give anyone my stuff. I don't have to hide anything or worry about the consequences if it gets found. I am guessing he sadly have quite a rough time in prison with other convicts or even the guards." My aunt was imprisoned for about 25 years as a political prisoner in China. When she was released, she was just agape at the cityscape and how it had changed. The smartphones, being able to pay by just scanning with WeChat, very commonplace there. For paying something like parking, it is very convenient, all the cars. The fashion everyone wears now compared to her closet of clothes she had before being taken away, so suddenly, literally, she was kidnapped from my mom's family in broad daylight, unannounced. In the end she took it all in much better than we all had expected. Right before the pandemic, she had just finished a 3-month vacation in Gillen with my other aunts. According to her, Gillen has changed the least. Cousin did 5 for meth and robbery. When she came out she started crying when she saw my youngest sister was almost an adult. I met a dude who had just gotten out of prison after 15 years. He said that his immediate shock was just seeing color. He said that everything in the joint was gray looking. He went to Walmart and was overwhelmed by all the colors he had not seen in 15 years. I knew a guy who went in around 2005, I want to say, got out a few years later, and we were driving around. He kept pointing to people on the street asking, "What are those?" This was downtown Seattle at the height of hipsters. That was a difficult thing to explain. Ended up with the New Goths as a best translation. A friend of mine was in prison from age 16 to 32, and he said the biggest hurdle to overcome was trying to learn how to date and have healthy relationships without going through the process of dating during adolescence and early adulthood. He had to learn to meet his partners where they were at and to understand that the women his age often had relationship experiences that they carried with them, positive and negative, that would impact them in their current relationships. He couldn't relate because he didn't have that baggage, so he had to learn it through them rather than by his own experience. He also strongly advocates for the need for comprehensive sex education and education about healthy relationships in juvenile detention and prison. My brother just recently got out after 4 years. The first thing he did was take a shower, then run his feet along the carpet in the house. He said he just had to. We asked him what he wanted for dinner, and he was like, anything. But I could make us some ramen. We all declined the Cheeto ramen recipe, and asked him if he had seen any ads for food he wanted. KFC has those chicken and donuts. Those look fucking good, those aren't a thing anymore, well shit. Okay, get me anything, I don't care. Along with that, I feel like people who were in prison for so long have a hard time making decisions. Anything we got him, and asked what he wanted, it was too overwhelming to choose. All honesty, it makes perfect sense. He hasn't had a much choice in his life for 4 years, and asking him what kind of clothes he wants was hard for him. All he could say was, nothing gray. I don't want to wear gray. I hope he's out for good. I can tell life outside is overwhelming at times, but eventually he'll get used to it. Edit. Another thing, we let him pick out shampoos, and he was sniffing every single one of them. Not only that, but he would squeeze the bottle to sniff them, and the wash would goop out. We had to show him how to do it. It was funny cause he couldn't make the choice, yet he was like, all of these smell like shit. This is an awesome question, thank you for posting. Speaking about my good mate, since he doesn't use Reddit. He did a couple different stunts that landed him time, but he was surprised at who all got in contact with them after getting out. While he was in, only a handful of people kept tabs on him, visited or called, but as soon as he got out, all these people he hadn't heard from started congratulating him. He said it probably shouldn't have surprised them, but it did. He didn't want any of that and thought all of it felt so disingenuous. I went in around the first iPhone. Came out around 2014, and what disturbed me the most wasn't so much smartphones, but how everyone everywhere had one in their hands staring at it. It felt very Black Mirror / Twilight Zone-ish. Walmart. My first day out. I had an unreasonable fear the exit would close, or I would get lost, so I kept glancing towards the exit every 20 steps or so. I didn't think of using a shopping cart, so my hands were full of clothes. Took me about 7 trips to feel comfortable in Walmart. My stepdad killed the guy who raped his sister and ended up in jail for like 30+ years, I think. He initially had a shorter sentence, but I think he tried to escape a few times or something. Anyway, he was so baffled by stores and how big they were and the sheer amount of stuff in them. Like, his mind was blown when he found out there was a whole aisle dedicated to cereal, and he would actually get overwhelmed really easily while shopping because it was so different from just marking a few items on a piece of paper and having them brought to you. Oh, and he didn't know what glow sticks were. The first time the family got glow sticks in his presence, I gave him one, and he was actually afraid of it. I remember him asking, "Is it going to explode?" And we all just laughed. The world didn't care of our absence. I drive Uber and picked up a guy that had just finished 15 years for drug charges. He had only been out a few days, and thought the Apple CarPlay in my car was some type of alien witchcraft. I ended up telling him to move to the front seat, and let him dick around with the system for the duration. He really got into the endless music that Apple Music had to offer. *edit for typos, that's awesome. I've never been to prison, and I remember the first time I got Spotify, and was so amazed I could just search for music and listen to it so easily. My cousin was in jail for 16 years, I believe, and got out in 2017. And I remember showing him Minecraft, and he said it was the coolest thing he had seen even before prison. I showed him some other games, and he was absolutely blown away. I don't think I have ever seen a jaw drop down so far. I did 5 years, as I went in after 2 weeks my dad died. 6 months before I came home, my husband died. It's weird when you get out and realize time hasn't stood still. Although I know it won't, you kind of think it does. My kids were all 5 years older, obviously, yet the home was still the same. It was weird after 5 years. I think if I did longer it would have blown my mind. Although reality isn't a thing in prison. I had an older gentleman come in one day, and he seemed a little off. Not like weird, just like he felt out of place. He came up to pay after his meal, and I was making small talk with him. Kind of laughing and joking, waitress shit. Whatever. He hands me his card and it's a JPay card, which is what you use to get upon release from prison. I swipe it and hand it back, and suddenly he seems overwhelmed. I asked him if he was okay, and he was like, "This is the first place I stopped after I got released. I was afraid you were going to treat me different after you saw my card. I haven't been in public in 20 years. I have literally no idea what he did. I don't plan on ever looking him up, but like I was nice to him." He was emotional because I treated him like a person. A homie of mine found the freedom really obscure. He was so used to the guards telling him what to do that he got accustomed to it. He was really anxious because he had no sense of direction. On a lighter note, he was amazed by Snapchat filters. He kept on posting on his Snapchat story all selfie videos with filters. That some women bleach their anus now. Stolen from another thread from some other time. They prefer to call it changing their ringtone. Wow. You are still with us. Thanks for being such a nice person. As long as you are here, why not like this video and subscribe to our channel? Also, you can press the bell icon, so you won't miss any future uploads.